Hi everyone, I'm Stephen Pook. I've been a cameraman for 20 odd years now. I've always loved it. I've had some great opportunities from it. Film documentaries, television programs, sport events, all sorts of things, filming with all sorts of people all over the world. I also edit my own material and run my own small production company these days as well called Pinch, and hopefully you'll find some of this useful.
Hey, if you want something to be interesting, stick a bird on it.
They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo.
In the evening, as nature slumbers peacefully, tired after the long day, the peasant, burnt by the sun, will fall silent to celebrate your passing. Wow.
Hermano, y yo digo, hermano, las pelotas, güey.
He'd run through a brick wall for you, for the team, for the fans, for England.
My favorite place I've ever filmed was Chernobyl, which wasn't in the show reel, but that was one of my most incredible places I've ever been and filmed. And I went with some musicians who were making a film there, and yeah, that was an unbelievable, amazing place to film. It was like goosebumps whilst you were shooting things. And I don't know, I love filming. I love filming in Africa. I love filming in India. I love traveling. Two small kids now, which make it more difficult, but yeah.
This is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how you prepare, how you control your environment, how you prepare for an interview, how you actually film the interview itself. Going to talk about rolling early. We're going to talk about what to film, filming on location, and just some other tips. So, excellent. Let's start. Steve, what do you do first then? Tell us about how you prepare.
Preparing's super important, and apologies if there's going to be a lot of stuff here that you guys all already know, I'm sure. So I'm sorry if any of this is patronizing, but best to go through it all. Preparation, I'll always prepare my kit the night before I go on a shoot and just know where everything is, know that batteries are charged, know that I have enough media to record on, know where my microphones are, know where my lenses are, and have everything super organized before I go anywhere. I own my own kit, but I didn't for a long time. And I know that most of you or some of you will be using pooled equipment or other people's kit that you get quite late notice. So it's really important to go through that really carefully before you start doing anything, because people will not leave things the way that you need them. So yeah, again, make sure your batteries are charged, make sure you have camera cards to record onto, make sure you know where things are. It will just take away a whole load of stress when you arrive at location. Also, have the camera ready to roll when you're leaving the house or leaving your office, because you never know what you're going to run into. Well, it's a crazy place at the moment, and I think some of you work in news, and you should just be ready to cover whatever you encounter on the road, even before you get to location or wherever you're going to. be ready to go is my tip.
You say one of your tips here on the screen is on time is late. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a cliche really, but there's a saying with camera people and crew that if you're on time, you're late. So I will always arrive early on a shoot. And there's various reasons for that. Just general politeness and courtesy for the people you're filming with. I'm freelance, so people are paying me to be there. And if you're late, that's a really bad look. But also, if you arrive somewhere early, it gives you an extra chance, even if it's 10 minutes, to look around where you are, check out your environments, see what the weather's doing, see what the light's doing, see the general environment you're going to be filming in, if there are any problems with sound, if there are any security issues, depending on where you are. If it's the same issue as being prepared with your kit. You know, if you're there early, you can check everything out so that you're in a calmer mind space to start filming. So tip 2 is managing your environment. So again, kind of like just what I was talking about there, really looking around you, analyzing where you are and what the problems would be. If there aren't any problems, then looking at what you can film in that environment. What the architecture's like, what the people are like where you're filming. I'm basically looking at things as I would be if I were taking photos on holiday. Like, what would make a nice photo? And the same principles apply to what you're going to film. Are there nice angles? Are there anything that catches your eye that you think once you get your camera out, you'll be drawn into there and filming it?
Basically, this isn't you filming, this is just you doing a recce.
Yeah, this is a shoot I was on last week, and this is just some iPhone footage I took for the purposes of this. Just when I turned up, this is what I first saw. I was filming a school in Bristol. Really nice, but this was just my first impression when I turned up. I was filming with a chaplain there and interviewing him. And I'm just looking around, looking at angles, looking at what the building is, looking at where the light's coming from. That's my camera there because I was setting up to film through kind of window in the brickwork there. And I might even go and take a few shots on my iPhone, move around, see what's working. And depending on who you're working for, you might even be able to use some of those shots later on as well.
So here's this is like the second part of your recce, as it were. What's happening here?
So this is me just framing up a few establishing shots, seeing where the light's coming from, seeing what happens when I point the lens into the sun. Basically framing up a few things to see how it works on my iPhone that I can go back to later with my real phone, with my real camera and shoot. So that shot there, for instance, you'll see in a minute, I think I replicated that with my bigger camera. I'll also, I'm not sure if you go back and just play some sound on that last one, Dan, can we do that? I don't know if there's sound on there.
There is a bit, yeah. Can you all hear the singing on that?
So that audio, whilst I was taking these shots, through a crack in the door, there was someone doing some fire practice. So I just recorded a minute on my phone as a voice memo of that audio because it was really nice, that I later then dropped in over these shots. And I would happily use audio off an iPhone as well under a real sequence for broadcast. So the point is just have your eyes and your ears open, be listening to things, see what's going on. If something really nice is happening, try and capture it somehow to use it.
Cool. So you've done your recce, you've got an idea of what kind of filming you want to do. What happens next?
So this is my interviewee, Simon, who was the chaplain at the school. We had maybe 15 minutes with him before I had to set up an interview. And I knew that the people I were working for needed some establishing shots of him and introduce him as a character in this film. and I basically had 15 minutes to move around the space and ask him to do a few things for me. So by that point, I knew in my head where to film from, and I was also improvising. So my personal thing is I quite often like to shoot through things, shooting through this door. There's a frame within a frame here, shooting through the crack in the statue towards the end, filming reflections. You could film this area in a really straight way. I'm always trying to, I guess, find more interesting angles than the straight obvious angle that will initially occur to you. And often I would say don't be afraid to try some what probably feels a bit weirder on location. Sometimes the weirdest kind of angles that I do of things, if I'm giving it to another editor, is often what they'll end up using. So over the years, I've sort of gained more confidence to follow my instincts and do some more unusual shots, because I've just seen over time that editors love that stuff. And
Do you practice this, Steve? When you're at home, are you kind of practicing filming through things or trying different angles? Or
I will with photography more. If I'm out with my kids or out and about, I really love photography as well. And a lot of the same principles apply to when you're filming. You're composing a shot. You're looking at angles. You're looking at shapes within that shot. It's all the same principles. So I think that's the way I will practice. But the reality is where you go is totally different. Every environment is totally different. This example here, I'd never been there before. This was a private school. I was lucky because the light was amazing that morning, and Simon was happy to do whatever he wanted. We had like just over an hour with him in total, and within that time that he'd given us, he was happy to do whatever he wanted. So the practicalities of doing this was, I asked in the first shot there, I would say, Simon, can you go to the end of this corridor, please? And I'll give you a cue, you walk towards me, and then can you walk here? Can you stop? I mean, if there was audio on there, you'd probably hear me saying, can you take a few deep breaths? Can you look left and right? I'm directing him as I'm going. And obviously I'll cut all that sound out afterwards if I'm editing my own pictures, or someone else will.
I would say to everyone who's listening, and welcome to the people who've recently joined, just practice all the time. Whenever I'm out with my kids, I'm always taking photos of them or filming on my iPhone or taking my DSLR with me. And I'm always just trying out different angles and different styles of shooting. My kids get really bored and embarrassed by it now because they keep saying, oh, Dad, stop filming us. But honestly, the more you try different shots and the more you try filming, from different angles or through things, as Steve says, the easier it becomes and the more ideas you'll get for next time you're actually on the shoot.
Avaz is asking about professional equipment there as well. And I'm sure some of you are filming more and more on iPhones these days as well. That's going to change as you go through your career, and the kit's going to change and get better. Actually, iPhones, you've got an iPhone 8 there, Avaz. I mean, it's not totally ideal, depending on what you're working towards and what your output is, but they're pretty good. Like those camera phones that these days are much better than the real cameras that I was filming on when I first started my career, which were like this size, proper looking cameras. The iPhone 8 is going to shoot nicer pictures than that did back then. So the same principles apply. My tip would be get a tripod for your iPhone 8, and maybe depending on budget and depending on what access you have, you can get some gimbals now for iPhone 8, which is, sorry if this is patronizing any of you, a gimbal is just like a small rig that allows you to get really steady shots on your iPhone. And they're relatively cheap these days, for the iPhones anyway. These shots that Dan are playing now were shot on my iPhone, and my camera's actually got a cracked lens, which isn't ideal at the moment, but depending on what your output is, you could probably use a few of these shots for broadcast.
You've done your pre-filming, you've got some nice establishing shots. Let's talk about the interview, Steve. How do you prepare for an interview?
Every interview is going to pose new problems for you, depending on the location you're filming in, depending on who you're filming with. If you're filming with someone who's very high profile, there'll be an expectation to use a lot of lights and make it look very glossy and kind of rich feeling. If you're filming a more intimate documentary or news piece with someone about something that's more sensitive, then you're going to treat that interview in a different way. So think about your story, think about who you're filming with, and act accordingly to whatever that job is, basically. Things that I'll do every time is try and make someone feel at ease. When I first meet them, won't have the camera with me, or I won't be looking at them through a camera. In pre-COVID times, I would shake their hand, basic human things, introduce myself, smile at them, thank them for doing the interview, tell them what my expectations are going to be, tell them how long it's likely to take. Just be really clear with people. It's basic human skills to make people feel at ease. And if they feel at ease, they're going to give you, I mean, I hate being interviewed. I hate doing this. I hate being in front of the camera. I find it really uncomfortable. And I think most people do, really. Unless you're a 21-year-old YouTube star or something. The whole practicalities of filming television make interviewing people a much more unnatural process. Inherently, radio interviews are much more personal, easier process because you haven't got the whole equipment issue around it. So I think the more information you give people and the more you can flatter them and make them feel at ease, the better it's going to be.
I used to find as well, if you are filming, for instance, an artist and they're really nervous on camera, I would just quite often get them painting or doing their art first, and then chuck in a few questions whilst they're talking. Is that something you try, Steve, or something you do?
I mean, if you've got the chance to film with them before you do an interview, that's definitely a good tip. Get them used to the camera, get them used to you. Try and make it as informal as possible. Most people are fine with these things, and most people will prepare as well. If they know you're coming that day, most people will prepare a certain amount and do their best, you know. Occasionally people are super nervous and really clam up on camera. If that happens, I would say take a break, stop, and then come back to it. Like you say, film them doing something else that they're comfortable with, film them drawing, film them making a phone call, making a cup of tea, whatever it is. Just get them used to you.
So this is some behind the scenes filming of you filming on Friday. What's going on here? Describe what's happening.
This is my worst nightmare because someone's sat in the chair that I'm interviewing them ready for me, watching everything I do as I'm setting up, which is probably the thing I hate the most. I'd much rather someone went and had a cup of tea, went and did some paperwork somewhere, and came back 15 minutes later when I had everything set. I did ask him to do that, and he had nothing to do, and he didn't want a coffee, and he was quite interested in what we were doing and happy to sit there, which is fine. So this was a relatively basic setup in a church, and we were speaking to this guy about coping with death in the military and after death care with bereaved families. So it was for, you know, quite a heavy interview, but he'd done it before. He seems happy enough with the whole thing, and we were talking while I was setting up. I was explaining what we were doing, and the whole time I'm thinking about how this is going to look.
Rocky from Dakar is asking, do you film alone or do you have a helping hand?
At the moment, everything's alone because of COVID. People don't want big crews with them. Sometimes I'll have a sound man with me. And depending on what the shoot is, sometimes I'll have a bigger crew, but most of the time these days I'm by myself.
Halla is asking, let's assume you don't have this camera and lights. and you're only going with a basic Canon camera or an iPhone, where would you interview inside this church?
Okay, good question. So my setup here, I'm pointing towards those back windows, which would, if I didn't have lights, you have to make the decision about either really overexposing those windows or having your interviewee very dark. So I wouldn't use that as a backdrop if I didn't have lights with me. What I would do, if I turned around 45 degrees or 180 backwards, I would have the light from those stained glass windows coming onto Simon and use that as the natural light and film back the other way into the church, or film into the seats even here, into the pews on the left-hand side. But I wouldn't film into bright light. I would have the light the other side of him. And I do that. Sometimes I'll always try and use a light if possible, but sometimes you just can't do that. If you're working in news, you haven't got time to set up sometimes. So you have to adapt to your environment. You have to be flexible, and you have to look about what opportunities you have in front of you. So
Dan from Lagos is asking, he loves kit, does Dan from Lagos. What camera are you using now?
that's a Sony F5. So I use 3 cameras these days. I use a Sony A7. I've just got the new one, which is a DSLR camera, which are really great cameras, shoot lovely pictures. Sound is more awkward recording sound onto them, but it's fine. This is a Sony F5, which is quite old. It's like an FS7 type camera. And for really high-end shoots, I use Alexa cameras now as well, but those are expensive cameras, and so I don't tend to use those for television shoots. I use them for advertising or music videos or commercial stuff.
Kamal is asking, how long does it take you to set everything up normally?
That's a difficult question to answer straight. It just depends on the situation. This, I probably had 15 minutes to set up. More and more I'm being asked to film on multiple cameras in the same setup. This was one camera, one light, one boom. I was doing my own sound. I mean, I've been doing this a while, so I know what I need to do, and my kit was prepped and ready. So tripod up, camera on it. The camera was almost ready to roll. I connected the microphone. I mean, it took maybe 15 minutes to set this up. Like I said before, he was sat there waiting for me, which is awful. But ideally, you'd have a bit of time to yourself to do things methodically, and do a sound test, make sure things were working, and then ask your interviewee to come in and sit down for you.
What do you do when your guests are worried about your setup time and you're under pressure to start filming? Asks, I don't know who's asked that. I can't work out who their name is from.
Yeah, well, we were talking about this yesterday, Dan, weren't we? I mean, I've been in that situation where I've turned up and people are looking at their watches and asking how much time you need. And you mean, it's a really difficult question to answer, because normally, like an hour would be nice to set this interview up if I had it. But if someone's saying to you, can we go in 10 minutes, then it's a mix, right? You make sure you're not stitching yourself up by not giving yourself enough time. Do the basics in your own time. There's no point doing the interview if it's going to be unusable and look terrible. So I would say to people, be clear to them, tell them what you need to do, and do the basics. Make sure the camera is set, make sure the sound is good. Sound is really key.
At the end of the day as well, people want to look good, right? And if you say to them, I can rush this and you're going to look all right, or I can take a bit of time and you're going to look great, then that normally buys you a bit of time as well, I would say. So let's move on, Steve. So you've kind of set your shot up, but what are you thinking about in terms of framing the shot itself?
Quite often I'm thinking about the composition of the background. I mean, looking at lines and a nice kind of balance to the shot and the lights. this shot here, I mean, if I'd have put Simon on the other side of the frame here in front of the windows, this, the side of the frame, which is currently behind his head, would have been quite a boring background. It was really nice. There's some candles flickering over his left shoulder there. There was some really nice light coming through from the stained glass windows, a little bit of color there, and just had a nice balanced kind of like horizontal lines coming down, nothing coming out of his ears or head that's going to distract you when you're looking at that shot. And also thinking about being sympathetic to the story you're telling. It's not rocket science. This guy is a pastor and he's speaking in his church, so you want to demonstrate his environment. If we were interviewing a footballer, obviously you would do something which was more sympathetic to his profession and the story. So
this is a different framing you've gone for here. So just to say, Steve was filming this for a TV program that's going out on BBC One, so that primetime TV program. So you framed that one kind of quite mid-shot-ish, I would say. I
got told I had to have the poppy in shot, which was the reason it's that size, in all honesty. The poppy had to be in shot, and it was for a mainstream BBC One audience in the UK. So very kind of generic, standard shot size, I would say. But obviously, depending on what your style is and what your output is, there are other options. So if this was for a more documentary type output, if you whiz forward a bit, Dan, I would probably shoot it tighter. And looking up at him a bit to give him a sense of a bit more gravitas if you shoot up at someone. I would say experiment. It's a real personal style choice. That's a much more intense shot if you're filming someone like this, but make sure their eyes are 3/4 of the way up the shot. I don't mind cutting off the top of people's heads a bit if we're filming tight, but as long as the proportions of the shot are kind of okay. And that, I mean, that I prefer the closer shot in this, but it wasn't right for the client that I was working for. This is a more unconventional framing. We call it a negative frame because he's looking out of the wrong side of the shot in a traditional sense. It's quite fashionable at the moment. I know that Dan absolutely hates this. He would wince watching it. I don't mind it. It's a stylistic choice. I think some people can feel like it's distracting because it's kind of technically wrong, but as a second alternative shot, it's an option.
I think as long as people know why they're using that shot, right? It's meant to make the audience feel a little bit uncomfortable, I think. And if you're using it for that reason and you can justify it, I think it's okay to use it. And you've obviously lit it and framed it nicely as well. Mark Cecil's making a really good point as well, which is you can use your iPhone as a second camera. If you are being asked to do second cameras, it gives you a really, really nice shot. Latte from Dakar in Senegal is asking, what kind of lens did you use for this shot to get this kind of depth of field?
Yeah, I used a prime lens, which a prime lens is a lens that doesn't zoom in or out. It's a fixed focal point. Some of you may have access to prime lenses, some of you might not. You can get that depth of field with zoom lenses, but yeah, prime lenses allow you to have a really shallow depth of field, which means a soft, hazy background. Which I think we're going to talk about that in more detail a little bit, aren't we? But
yeah, we are in a second. Yeah, I've got one more question as well from Adebayo, who's asking: is it better and less stressful just to recompose or resize your shot frames in the editing stage?
Yeah, well, you can do if you need to. You can, and if you're shooting 4K pictures, you absolutely can zoom in and resize things a bit. And I will do that when quite often these days you're reconforming your films for Instagram or for Facebook, and people want a square version of your film, or a version in portrait, which is like a vertical image flip round from 16:9. And if you're shooting 4K, it's much easier to do that because you don't lose the quality when you're zooming in. If you're filming just HD, that's more tricky. The pictures start to break up a little bit when you start resizing them in HD, but you can do that. Yeah, I would say it's preferable to film things the way you want them to see at the beginning. Things can be saved in the edit and you can make choices in the edit, but if possible, try to walk away with something that you're visually happy with on the shoot.
So this is an example of a film you made. This is a kind of an advertisement style film, but tell us what's going on in this screen here, Steve.
Yeah, this is just just another example really of a interview setup that was, the client I was working for wanted a really natural, elegant, naturalistic feel. And we were in like a kind of warehouse environment. So this is quite a relatively basic setup. It's one big key light. If you look at the picture top right, the light there is giving me a nice big soft diffused light. So in the front of that light there's some diffusion paper which just gives a nice natural light pool onto the girl who we were speaking to. That was all I used on her. And then the background, which was just a kind of grey concrete wall, which actually worked fine because the chair was nice with the colour next to it, I think. But in order to just make that a bit more interesting, I shone a light through the tree just to give it some shadows falling onto that wall. Again, you could have filmed this setup if you turned up to a shoot and you didn't have lights, and it was that same background. You could shoot with no lights in there. Dangers of that are you lose a little bit of control of your image. So if the sun outside the room where you're filming is coming in and out, it's going to affect the exposure on your camera. So it's preferable in my eyes to use a light because it just makes things more consistent. Nothing's going to change when you're rolling your camera and speaking to someone. But the aim of this is just to get, the shot on her, the close-up of her face, bottom left, my aim was for it not to look like it was lit. It should look like very natural and flattering shot. A bit of darkness on the left-hand side of her cheek, and a kind of like nice natural light coming across her face.
So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different interview shots here, Steve. Tell us what's going on.
So I just used one camera on this shoot. But just because of the nature of what we're filming, we had the chance to do things with her in a number of different ways. So I got her to repeat the same lines basically from a number of different locations. Actually, we haven't totally finished making this film yet, so I can't show you the video clip of it, but it will chop around and look like there's maybe 6 or 7 different cameras in the room. Also, we shot some of the shots, like the top left one, that's actually we would use the microphone in shot there. So that's actually the shot that we would use intentionally to give it a more of an authentic feel. So you're not trying to hide the practicalities of actually making the film in your final film.
So you've done your interview, and then you're going to get some cutaways.
Yeah. So the end of the interview, we had very little time here. Simon had given us, by this point, we'd been with him for like 45 minutes. I knew we had maybe 10 more minutes with him before we had to go, and he had another appointment. So without cutting at the end of the interview, I moved in and just got what I could. Always try and get something is what I'd say. So I got a close-up of the poppy, a close-up of his collar, and a close-up of his hands, which is pretty much all I could do there. But if you don't get anything, and you get back to the edit and you need to snip out some of his words, you've got nowhere to go. So always try and get something. The shot with his hands was nice because this was actually a really deep, sad interview he was talking about. He was talking about being with people when they die in the military and holding people when they die and then having to speak to their families. So it was quite an upsetting interview and quite heavy. And yeah, the cutaway of his hands, he was kind of like he's got very short nails and he looked a little bit nervous. He was picking his nails a bit and it was just relevant to the story. And I haven't seen the edit from this yet, but I can imagine they'll use that shot because it kind of tells its own story in pictures. It tells you more about that person than just looking at their face. You know, it tells you about how he's feeling. So just basically have your eyes open, looking for things which will be sympathetic to your story.
This tip, what do you mean by start recording early?
So press record on your camera before you need to. As soon as someone sits down, or even before, start recording on your camera, and then make sure that you don't press record again when they sit down, and then don't record the interview. But what that does is just gives you, again, it's a little bit of a cliche in documentaries these days where they use the person sitting down, they'll use a clapperboard, they'll use someone testing the microphone, but it does give, it just is, again, it gives you more footage to play with in the edit afterwards. Sometimes it might not be relevant, you might not use it. Sometimes if you're doing a news report, it will give your reporter a chance to voice into that interview, do some script explaining who this person is. So you see them sit down and shot, you see a light go on, all that stuff. This example here was a really boring shoot for a corporate company talking about business management, but they didn't want it to be a boring, to have some of their corporate personality put through. And this guy's name is Colin. They wanted some of his personality to come through. So we made a conscious decision to shoot behind the scenes footage and include the pre-roll stuff to show more of his personality and to make it more believable and authentic and watchable, basically, because it could have been really dry, this film.
Can you please stop for me?
Yeah, I can talk about Agile for a while if that would help. Sorry. Should I do it again? You've likely heard of Agile. In fact, you've probably been on a training course, or your teams are talking about stand-ups and retros.
Yeah, so the alternative to that is something much more boring and straight. That's not going to be relevant to everything you do, and in news, that's not going to be that relevant. But if you record before your interview starts, you never know what's going to happen. You might get something else. You might get a little bit of magic that's happening.
Mark is asking a question on those lines. Would you always let your interviewee know that you've started recording for this before the interview footage? If you tell them, it might not be as natural if you don't. Yeah. Is that ethical?
Yeah, it's a good point. I probably would mention it. I'd probably say I'm going to roll cameras, but I'll tell you when we're starting the interview. I don't think you should be, you're not doing this to try and trick someone, catch them out. That's not the intention of what I'm saying. But yeah, I would normally be transparent about this with someone. Sometimes they're speaking to someone else and it doesn't matter. And if people are speaking about sensitive things, sometimes I would always tell them that the camera's rolling.
We've called this tip just getting useful footage. What do you mean? Describe what useful footage is. Say you've got a really short time with a person. What shots are you definitely going to try and get?
Yeah, so these are just the sort of the basic building blocks of any short film, any news film, any television documentary, things that you can get when you've got a short amount of time with someone. Hero shots, which are essentially portraits of people. I normally film them in slow motion. They can be used as establishing shots of someone. You could put graphics over to introduce who someone is. So I will ask someone to just stand and look into the lens. This one I asked the guy that I was with, my producer, to move the light a little bit So he just had some light coming on and off his face, just to add a bit more drama and interest to the shot. If I had more time, I might have done this in 3 or 4 different shots, but we had very little time with Simon here. So I was just trying to maximize what I could get with him in the 5 minutes we had. People always feel awkward doing this. And I'll often say to them, this is going to be the most awkward thing you do, but just if you just give me 10 seconds, looking into the lens. And sometimes I'll say, like, put your chin down a bit so that the eye line is looking up into camera. And sometimes I'll try and make people laugh if that's relevant. And often that will be the bit that gets used if it's relevant to the story. Yeah, but essentially it's like a sort of moving portrait of somebody is how you should imagine that.
Walking shots.
Walking shots, always really useful in films. Editorially, they allow you to get from one location to another. They play a number of useful roles, really. They allow you to introduce someone. They allow this person to do something natural. Actually, this is, again, we were tight on time here, so that's not a very good shot at all because I was stuck on the wrong lens. But I'm just putting that in there. I've saved that shot afterwards in the edit by just putting some stabilization on it. Which
you can do that in Final Cut Pro as well.
Yeah, it's just a preset that you can drop on it. So again, the kind of tip is get everything you can, but if you have a gimbal on your iPhone or on your DSLR, use it for walking shots. That's great. That just gives you a real super steady shot. If you can't, if you're just on a C300 or a Sony camera, use as wide a, if you're walking with someone, use as wide a lens as you have, and that will allow you to be naturally more steady. And then maybe you can stabilize up in the edit as well.
Just going to show a few examples of how you've used walking shots in different edits. I think that's such a useful thing to get your character from one location to another. You know, you can just drop them in at any point. And if you've done some filming in one location and you've done filming in another location, you're thinking, how do I join these up? The walking shots are just so useful. They also introduce the character really well, I think. They show the character. They also show the location. So it's kind of serving 2 purposes, really. What about sequences? How important are sequences?
Sequences are super important, really. You can't get away from them. It's just the way that you allow TV to be made. I mean, if you didn't do this as a sequence, you'd just be stuck on one shot. So, I mean, if you want to be less conventional about it, again, you don't have to use this in the edit, and you can chop around a bit more. But again, we were tight on time again here. So I shot, if you go back to the beginning of that one, Dan, that shot there was taken from the exact same position that I filmed the interview from. I just moved his chair out of the way and filmed Simon on the wide shot. I asked him to go and, can you go and blow out some candles and light a couple more candles for me? I filmed him walking away. So if you looked at the rushes from that, you'd have all the dirty stuff at the beginning of him walking in front of lens and everything. And then I would say, Simon, just give me 2 more minutes, please. And can you just do that again? And then I took the camera off the tripod, ran in and got these shots, and I got him to, it probably took 45 seconds to get those close-up shots. And then he was super keen to get out of there because he was late by this point. I managed to squeeze one slow motion shot of a candle being lit.
Trying to kind of talk about documenting the scene on location. What things are you looking for? When you walk into a room or a location, what are you looking for to film?
Again, wide shots in detail, really. If it's all possible, I'll normally just take a breath and walk into a room and just spend a few moments looking with my eyes, looking at what's happening, thinking about the story you're covering and what's relevant to you. If you're filming in a factory, is the product that's being made there relevant, or is the process of how things are being made relevant? Is the makeup of the employee relevant? Think about what story you're trying to tell, and then go in and try to demonstrate that with your pictures. and get as much as you can and get as much variety as you can. So
Tell us about
looking
this one here that we're watching now.
Yeah, so this is in Egypt, actually. I think there's a few people in Cairo on this call. You might recognize a few of these people. This was in a factory in the commercial district, talking about manufacturing, clothes factory, and a family business that was being run there. I mean, this was a lovely place to film. There's so much character in the room, and everyone was really happy to have us there, and very natural around cameras. So I probably spent 30 minutes by myself when we first went in there, moving around all these different areas, just getting detail with people. And I was speaking to people as well when I was filming sometimes to make them feel a bit easier. And then Charlotte, who's the girl, and her mum there who we were filming with, came in, and we did I knew I needed some more setup shots with her. So I did these. This is a kind of hero shot as well, and some walking shots of her on a gimbal. And I did some more setup shots of her working, which are all faked, obviously. So I'm asking her if she can do this. What would she, I sort of said to her, what would you do normally if you're in here? And she said, well, I'd walk around and talk to people. I would be looking at the products. And so I just asked her to recreate that. And we did it 2 or 3 times, and I did it on a wide shot, and then I'd move in and try and get some detail. And then shots like this, move in and get some really tight shots of things, which are super helpful in the edit.
How would you practice something like this? If you're giving tips to all the people watching today, what tips would you give them for practicing?
Well, a really good way of practicing is try to film something in your office or your home or your workplace. Think of the most boring thing possible. Think of like how you would make a coffee, and maybe shoot that and try and make it interesting. There's a few videos out there, Dan, you might be able to share it with people, of exactly that, trying to make boring things interesting.
We are overrunning. I'm really sorry if we're losing any people because we're overrunning. That's because Steve has been so interesting. Steve, final tips then. How do you create reality? That's not
reality.
Yeah. What was your tips for creating a kind of really realistic look to your filming?
I mean, you guys need to all find your own style, really. I quite often find myself filming as though I'm eavesdropping on a scene. By that, I mean moving back and filming through things, peeking around corners, filming through windows, filming from afar into people. I really love all that stuff, finding nooks and crannies to film through, cracks in doors, bits of window. And I think when you see the rushes back, it gives the viewer a real sense of like eavesdropping on a scene. Obviously that's not always relevant to what you're filming, but I love doing that kind of stuff. If you're with someone for more fly on the wall shoots, if you're trying to get someone to speak, have a radio mic on them for as long as you can is a really good tip. And then you're getting really personal sound from them, even if you're a bit further away. If you're doing a fly on the wall shoot, start off by just getting the content, stick on people's faces until you feel like you've covered that part of the story, or you feel like you have a really interesting bit of footage or content there to use, and then move away and then create the scene around that.
Yeah, I always think when I was going out filming, I would plan a sit-down interview, and I'd think, right, these are the questions I'm going to ask on the sit-down interview, but I'm also going to chuck in 2 or 3 questions when that person is doing something relevant to the story. So it could be they're playing football, or it could be they're taking photographs or doing art or whatever, but I will chuck in a few questions specifically to get them kind of talking in a much more natural way. And I always find as well, if you're filming somebody doing something, you can ask them a question, you can let them answer, and then you can go silent just while you're filming, and they will want to fill that space, and you actually get into their subconscious, I think, a lot more. You get much more interesting answers. Final tip, somebody actually asked about this right at the beginning. What do you mean by recording 30 seconds of room ambient sounds?
This is just a tip to help you in the edit. If you're taking clips out of people speaking, and sometimes people can speak very quickly, and you've got to make some very tight sound edits in order to make what they're saying more coherent. If you chop out their audio and just have nothing underneath, it can sound very clipped. If you record room tone and lay that underneath in the edit, it basically allows you or your editor to create a very natural sounding interview and space out what people are saying. But you need some what is silence, but actually in the edit it's not completely silent, it's the tone of that room in order to fill those gaps. Always really helpful, and I would do that in every location I go to, outside or inside. Again, going back to the first example when we were at the school at the beginning with the girls singing, same thing, take some natural audio of where you are, I call it wild track, and sometimes that will be really useful to lay as a bed under your sequences rather than the sound that you actually had on those shots.
Got a couple of other tips here as well. Remember to eat. I was about 2 stone lighter when I was a video journalist because I would forget to eat all the time. But you're saying remember to eat, and as well, always think about your interviewees as well. If you're filming them for 4 or 5 hours, that's 4 or 5 hours for them as well. It's not just you that's tired, they're going to get tired as well. So always factor in food breaks, rest breaks, toilet breaks. I once was filming somebody for so long, they said, am I ever going to get the chance to go to the toilet? I was like, yeah, you probably should. How much do you plan before you go filming, Steve? For how much of an idea of what your film looks like do you have before you go out?
Sometimes I'll plan everything. I think planning is good. I think planning is pretty essential. At least, at the very least, I will know what I want the start and the end of whatever I'm filming to look like. And going on from that, sometimes everything will be planned. But what I would say would be flexible. It's rare that you will turn up on a shoot and film with someone or film a day and it will go as you planned. And to a certain extent, that's the beauty of doing this job. Unexpected things happen all the time, and you should be flexible. You should welcome that, and you should go with it when that happens and adapt to the things that happen in front of you.
I always think as well, if you've got your rough building blocks for the piece, your opening, your close, maybe the introduction, if you've got those in the can, it buys you a bit more time to be flexible and to look for those unexpected things.
Yeah.
But I never leave a shoot without knowing I've got the building blocks that I need to make a video.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions, anyone? I know that we've totally overrun. I think Steve's been really, really fascinating today. I think it's been great to have his kind of input. Are there any more questions from anyone?
Okay, yeah, someone's asking if you have to ask anyone else to film part of your story, which is a good question. Yes, I have. And if you're asking a contributor to film things for you for COVID reasons, you kind of have to walk them through that process, give them clear instructions of what you need, like real basics. Tell people to film, if they're filming on their iPhones, tell them to film in landscape. The amount of times you ask someone to film something for you on their phone and they'll film it in portrait like this and send you the footage after they've gone to a whole load of effort, and it's completely unusable and it's infuriating. So tell people to shoot landscape, tell them to hold their shots for longer than they think, and just give them really clear instructions basically, and be polite and ask them nicely, you know. Don't have high expectations, I would say.
Abdul from Abuja, please tell us what picture profile do you use on your Sony A7?
Picture profile 4 I've been using this week, which just gives a nice rounded shot. That's an absolute minefield of a question, because there's 20 different ways you could shoot. If you want to contact me directly, we can talk about that, or there's a whole load of YouTube videos that you can go through. Picture profile 4 is a pretty good start.
Cool. Miroslava, why Chernobyl? I understand it's a strange question, but what exactly made it feel so special to you?
Oh, it was the most magical place I've ever filmed. So it's a lot of effort to get in there. You need a lot of permission, and it's quite an effort driving from Kiev and getting through security. Once you're in the kind of the zone, which is completely taped off from the world, there's like about 20 miles outside of Chernobyl, which is cordoned off. But once you're in that zone, you're allowed to explore anywhere. So you can drive your car along a road, what looks like a forest, to your right-hand side. You can stop the car, walk in, and realize that actually it's a suburban street that no one's walked down for 30 years. And the houses will be open and you can go in. And it's like the most amazing place to explore ever, really. And then you've got in the middle of Chernobyl, there's the reactors still there being worked on and being made safe. And so you've got this whole narrative of the people that are working in there. There are these lots of old ladies who survived, called babushkas, who still live there. No old men. So there's all these really fascinating stories. Visually, it's incredible. Yeah, if you ever get the chance to go there, do it.
I think we're probably done. I don't think there are any more questions.
I suppose one question from Emery in Kinshasa about filming with iPhone and whether you always use the PNG app, which is a BBC app for filming. Are there any apps you would recommend, third-party apps, for instance, for filming with mobiles? I guess Mark Settle would have some info.
Mark Settle's the person to speak to. I mean, having done a number of Mojo courses now as well, PNG is fine. It works and it films at the right frame rate and everything. I know a lot of kind of people who do a lot of Mojo use Filmic Pro. Do you have any particular camera app on your phone that you use, Steve?
No.
Anybody who's got more questions about filming using apps, talk to Mark Settle, who is Mark with a C, M-A-R-C Settle, S-E-T-T-L-E at bbc.co.uk, who is an absolute Mojo guru. I think we're done. We've got a really lovely message to finish it off. Nice cat in the background. Thank you, Stephen. It was a great session. So I think we can all agree with that. It's a really, really useful session. If you want to unmute and give Steve a quick round of applause or say thanks or shout abuse at us, whatever you want to do, now is the chance to do it.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a very nice session.
Thank you, everyone. It's been absolutely lovely. We've got another one next month. I'll send out details shortly.
Thank you, Don, as well.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thanks ever so much, everyone. It's been amazing. Thank you.